and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. My name is Danette Fenton-Menzies. I am a executive coach. I am also an author, a speaker, and obviously a podcast host as well. Welcome today, and welcome in Jez FM, our producer. How are you today, Jez?
Hello, Danette. I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to say a most important thing that you left off there, adaptability expert. You have been absolutely you've been absolutely smashing the adaptability space. You've got a book, The Adaptable Leader, that people can check out. That's attached to this podcast. This is the companion piece to that book. But you are an adaptability leader. But beyond that, you've also been the co-founder and director of learning of Magical Learning, which is a facilitation and training organization that's been running for over 25 years, working with global and local brands. You've worked with local brands. People may have heard of Westpac, Coles, and the Australian government, maybe heard of those. But we've also partnered with international leaders, and this is not just working with them once, this is genuine partnering with Robin Sharma and John Mattone. So, you've got a lot of experience in the business space, and it's a pleasure to be doing this podcast with you, where we are giving out a free resource to help people adapt, which is very exciting. If you're struggling right now, this is the podcast for you. It's going to help you adapt. The world is moving very quickly. Adaptability is important, and this podcast is here to help you. Alrighty, Danette, before we get into our first segment here, how's your week going?
Week's been fabulous, Jez. It's starting to feel like spring. It got really warm on the weekend and I did a bit of mowing. We've got a ride on mower, so heaps fun. And then yesterday I looked outside in the morning and the bird baths were frozen over, so a little bit of winter has snuck back in.
That's unlucky.
It was freezing.
Yeah. Last week I tried to do some basketball. I got called up to be in a mixed basketball team, which has been a while. And I went out, did that, played pretty poorly, and then also got injured because I didn't warm up or cool down properly. So important lessons for everybody. Remember to warm up and cool down.
Well, hopefully you'll mend quickly, Jez.
Yes. Look, I've been doing yoga and I'm feeling a lot better, so nice. I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, Danette, I think it's time for us to dive into our first segment here, which is, of course, Adapt the News. Alrighty, this is Adapt the News. This is a segment where, Danette, we use your unique adaptable lens to look at news stories that are currently happening so people can see how adaptability is happening right now, or in this case, in the past and when it didn't happen. So again, we're going to stay on CNN, and I'm sorry I'm using CNN so much, everybody, but they're the easiest to find unique news stories on.
Yes.
I just want to let people know. So here's the headline of this story. It is, cave discovered in France may explain why Neanderthals disappeared, scientists say. Scientists have discovered this group of Neanderthals who have created a bit of a conundrum in the scientific world because there were some Neanderthals that existed 50,000 years later than we expected them to in a cave in France. So they existed by themselves, and what had happened was they had basically found a small valley that they had liked and just lived there and didn't explore too much. And what happened was between the 105,000 years that we previously thought Neanderthals lived yet and the 40,000 years, which is when these Neanderthals were dated to years ago, what has happened is basically the times changed from a regular climate to an ice age. And these people stayed in this valley, or these people, I should say, they as Neanderthal, stayed in the valley, and they did not expand their social circle. So essentially became quite sort of very homogenized, all the DNA in the group. And then as humans became explorers, they sort of went out and slowly bred with these groups until they were essentially bred out. Of course, this is how they live their lives, and they didn't make it to the future we did. So, Danette, I wanted you to take a look at all those facts, and what did you take away from this story as an adaptable leader?
I really liked the bit about they stayed small and insular, and the article sort of pointed out genetically this is not good for us. And I think from an adaptable perspective, it's totally true. So they sort of stayed close. There was another tribe not that far away. They didn't really interact with them. So they also didn't have that social connection to be able to thrive as well. So by being comfortable in their little valley felt good, but it actually led to them becoming extinct. And so I think some of the really important adaptable leadership lessons here are that it is important to be uncomfortable. It is really important to interact with others who are different from you. One, it gives in, new ideas, new thoughts, etc. And in this case, they needed new genes as well. So not the genes you wear, but the actual DNA type genes. There's my comedy for the day. And so the lesson there is we do need to get uncomfortable, and we need to seek out different opinions. We need to move around in order to get that diversity of thoughts to keep us alive long term.
And I think it even tells us a bit of a deeper thing about being a human being in some ways, which is that, human beings survived because we explored. People weren't happy with their environment as the Ice Age was starting to set in. They went, you know what, let's get out of here. And they just did it. Whereas these other tribes, not unlike we've talked to David Fish about this on the Magical Learning podcast, but Kodak stayed in its happy valley. And the Ice Age came through, which was iPhones. Yep. And basically, essentially destroyed their business, and it's because they didn't move. Yeah. Now they're starting to come back as people want that again, but it was a tidal wave that they just weren't prepared for. And this is, again, because Apple was exploring new areas, and all of a sudden it was coming in, disrupting industries, which is really fascinating. So it tells us a little bit about being a human being, though. We love to explore, and it's one of our best skills. And with that, we are also very adaptable. We exist on all climates on this planet. And it's because we have remained adaptable, even though we are, again, not dissimilar to these little guys that grew up in the valley. We just have a slight difference, which is that exploring mindset and little differences like that allowed us to thrive.
Yep. So I love that, Jez, because one thing all of us can do to be more adaptable is to get out and explore. So whether it's your neighbourhood, whether it's going overseas or to another part of the country, the more you explore, and I also think that exploration goes to considering different viewpoints, etc., that just naturally opens our brains up. So I love that insight. Thanks, Jez.
No problem. Well, Danette, today for the central portion of this podcast, you're going to be talking to Dr. Hayley Squance. Did you want to tell us a little bit about what you wanted people to keep their eyes open for in this conversation?
I think all of you will find Hayley's background really interesting. So, veterinarian in New Zealand, has worked a lot in emergency management, particularly with animals. And she has, for those of us who love animals, she has some really interesting insights. So post-COVID, obviously, there's a lot of people who are lonely. Their animals really are their connection. And so in things like disasters, being able to work with the person through their animals can actually be super helpful. I also really liked, she talked about an example where, and I like her insight, that often the really good collaborators are on the ground. They've seen what works and what doesn't, but they're not necessarily the highest in status when we're collaborating. And so if we don't create safety, those voices will often not be heard. And yet those voices often have the best solutions, or certainly moving the conversation towards better solutions than just those that perhaps are known in the industry, have the highest status, and therefore tend to talk a lot, and everyone looks to them and is quiet because they're sort of the experts. Also love the story she shared about the firefighter who hadn't gone to university and had a particular story about his knowledge, and having attended a week-long residential with Hayley, he was able to recognise that expertise doesn't just come from having a university degree. It can be through your experiences. And I think, again, if we don't challenge those old thought patterns, we'll miss some really essential voices when we are collaborating. So they were just some of my takeaways from what is a fabulous conversation.
Yes, and I bet, this is what I like about this whole podcast that we do, is that we bring in people that have different areas of expertise, and this is such a unique one. So if you're wondering about understanding crisis and also what animals can teach us and how animals react and how humans interact with animals, how that sort of gives us more lessons about crisis. I mean, this is a conversation you're not going to find anywhere else, Danette. So I think without further ado, let's throw to your conversation with Dr. Hayley Squance.
Hello and welcome to the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. My name is Danette Fenton Menzies, and in season 2, which is the season we're currently doing, we're looking at problem solving and collaboration. And today I've got a wonderful guest, a dear friend of mine, Hayley Squance, who's coming from New Zealand. And I'm first of all going to just check in. How's your week been, Hayley?
Oh, it's early in the week, but it's great. Had a fantastic weekend of spending it with like-minded people, learning lots of different things. So it's always great to have a very early, good start of the week.
Nice, nice. That's the best start, I reckon, to a week. So, Hayley, for our listeners and viewers that may not have come across you before, I'd love for you to do an introduction all about yourself.
Thank you, Danette. Well, I'm
You're welcome.
probably a little different to a lot of your guests with my background. I started my career in the veterinary profession, and so it has evolved to leading animal emergency management in New Zealand. So I've moved from teaching, so I have a very strong teaching background in vet
Nice.
schools, through to being the National Animal Welfare Coordinator for animals in New Zealand, so during disasters. So
Wow.
this whole discussion around collaboration is so important. I was fortunate whilst I was had that national role that I was able to do action research through a PhD. And
Nice.
it looked at collaboration. So it looked at how we could enhance multi-agency collaboration for animal emergency management. So I feel like I am in the right room with the right people.
I love it. And one of the things I love about the different guests I've had this season is everyone's got such a different background. And yet what I love is it builds on each other. So, can't wait to have this discussion. And I'm a massive animal fan. Like, I just love animals. And I would imagine when there's, disasters and stuff that, that's a really stressful place for both humans, but also for the animals as well.
It is. Emergency management or disasters is probably one of the most complex environments you can work
Mm.
in. And I find that animals, when I talk to my colleagues that are emergency management practitioners, be it firefighters or police or anyone as a first responder, a lot of them say the biggest tensions at the coalface is the fact that animals are present and that their owners are not with them. And so that can create a lot of tension. And then there's the reason why we have animals included in emergency management frameworks really is around human behavior. So people will refuse to evacuate if they can't take their animals with them, or if they are separated, they'll break through cordons. There is this whole thing around, we've evolved with animals, and animals have been there to protect us.
Yes.
And it's actually part of our DNA, this whole human animal bond. And so when I talk to firefighters and police, when they say, people just got to get over themselves, it's like, well, it's actually in our DNA. It's how we've
Mm.
evolved. And the behaviors that people have is actually because it's a neurological response. So we can't work against what our brain's telling us to
Yes.
do. So,
Yeah.
but on the other side too, I see that. So I've worked with animals all my life. I love animals. I love the human animal bond. And for me, we've actually got a gift here, because what connects us with community, and certainly in the role that I've had, and I found it a lot easier, is if we actually talk to people about their animals. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
pets.
Yes.
It can be farmers. People have strong connections with wildlife as well. So I say to the firefighters and the police, like, I've got a gift here to give you, and that's gift of connection. And so if you are wanting to ask people about what they're wanting, find out what is happening with their animals. Ask them questions about
Mm.
their animals.
Yep.
And you see that too, like walking around, you don't connect with people when you're walking on your own, but when you're walking with an animal, people will smile at you.
So
They'll
true.
start conversations. So
Yep.
yeah, I see it as a huge gift, and I'm
Yes.
going to use that gift as much as I can.
Oh, I love that. And I have a father. So my dad absolutely loves his little dogs. And every time one passes, he goes into the biggest funk. And my mum's like, no, 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 I can't bear the pain anymore. I don't want to get another dog because it's sad. And I'm like, Mum, if you don't get another dog, it's actually going to impact Dad and his life. And he goes, the dog gets him up every day to take him for a walk. And he's 87. So I'm like, if that's what gets you going, that's the most important thing. That's great.
Yeah, and we certainly have a lot of social isolation, and
Yes.
we certainly saw that a lot during COVID.
Mm.
And people are quite happy to be on their own. And what we did during COVID, I was part the animal response for that, is using those connections with people, because people are really hard to connect with during these events.
Yes.
And if you've got your socially isolated people and you're actually bringing that conversation around the animals, they're more likely to want to do something amidst for their animal. So that
Yep.
allows you to do something for them at the same time. Yeah.
Oh, I love those insights. Thanks, Hayley. All right, let's start with the questions. I'm very excited about this. So what have you seen or experienced that helps you with collaboration and or problem solving? And I imagine there's quite a few things you've seen and experienced over your time.
Yeah, so much, so much. There's good and there's bad, and coming from a veterinary background, and I really focused and I loved emergency and critical care, and I guess that was a natural progression for me to work in chaotic environments. But what I see from the veterinary profession at the moment is actually in crisis, because
Yes.
there's not we don't have enough people.
Yep.
We have a high suicide rate.
Yes.
And to me, it's really the fact that we don't necessarily collaborate particularly well. We've got a very imbalanced system in the practices, because we've got a hierarchy, and we're not actually using a team framework. We're using an imbalanced hierarchical framework. So from that, seeing the chaos and the absolute crisis that they're in, to stepping out and working into emergency management, it really opened my eyes to what collaboration looks like. There are good and there are bad that I've witnessed, but what it has done for me is actually made me look at the bigger picture. So, when working in veterinary practice, we were always, you are patient focused, and you're
Yes.
working in the veterinary profession because you love animals. But with animals comes owners, and then with owners comes community. And we don't tend to go past that bit. We do bring the owners in, but probably not as much as we should.
Yes.
We don't tend to bring in the whole family unit, because what's happening with that animal is actually impacting the whole family, not just the person that's in front of you. And
Yes.
so there are lots of things that are happening in that home that could impact the way that the animal needs to be treated. And then we go, this whole community part has been really eye-opening for me. Certainly seeing what stress does, and huge like community stress, and how that impacts people's thinking and the way that what directions they go in. It does just give a bigger view of what collaboration needs to be, and how it can really impact good outcomes.
Oh, I love that answer. And I want to give a big shout out here to our dear friend Carl Bovenizer, who is or was a vet in Isle of Man. And he's a dear friend of ours. And he talked to us about the suicide in vet, how it wasn't working for people. And obviously there's a lot of need there for that whole industry for a bit of a shift. So, yeah.
A fundamental shift.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so let's now go to giving us an example of where you've seen poor collaboration and or problem solving. I'm particularly interested, not so much about the organization or what it was, so much as the impacts that when it wasn't done well, what sort of impacts can we end up with?
So a recent one that I saw was around multiple professions coming together to address a problem, but they weren't, and they were saying they were collaborating, but they weren't. They weren't listening to everyone's perspectives, and
Yeah.
there was a real bias towards one way one profession wanted to go.
Yep.
And that might be okay for that profession, but the other ones that were in the room really didn't understand it, and they just kept quiet. And I said to them, why you need to speak up. I've
Yep.
spoken up for you, but you do need to speak up yourselves. And they just didn't feel safe. They said that they felt that if they spoke up, they'll come across as stupid.
Oh,
And
ouch.
yeah, and it was a real big dynamic of one profession that was, they're a really well-known profession and hold high stature within the community,
Yes.
whereas the other ones, they have a really important role to play, but they don't see themselves as intelligent. And actually, in that room, they were the experts, but they wanted to default to the ones that were seen as a higher status in the community, thinking that they would know best. And I could see
Yep.
that the ones that were not wanting to speak up were the ones that actually had the better solution.
Oh, wow. What an interesting situation. Yeah, and so if someone found themselves in that situation, what are some things they can do to make their voices heard when they don't want to appear stupid? What are some things we could do to help in that situation?
I think we all have a responsibility to be open
Yes.
and to be the allies for people.
Yep.
And allyship for me is a big thing.
Yep.
And I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said, we're trying to work out how to articulate some of the things that I've been doing in the work that I've been doing. And she's
Yes.
like, you build ladders for people. And it's like, actually, you do. You've got to
Yep.
build ladders. And I find that the people that are at the operational level
Mm-hmm.
usually have a lot of the really good solutions because they know what's going to work.
Yes.
So, I've worked at an operational at the coalface. I've been a first responder myself, so I understand those complexities.
Yes.
And so what I have done over the years is actually put myself in those positions at every single level. So
Love
as a
that.
first responder, as a coordinator at a regional level, and then from a strategic and policy level. So I
Yes.
tend to really throw myself in there and try and experience it and have open eyes. So stepping back and seeing that big picture of where everyone fits in.
Yep.
And I guess one of my values is that everyone has a place and a role to play, and nobody's more special than the other.
Yeah.
If you're the CEO, yes, you've got a good role, but the cleaner actually tends to have some really good solutions too.
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the veterinary clinics I used to work at, I was one of the leadership team, and I would be one of the first people there in the morning. Like I don't suggest I used to overwork myself, but some of the best conversations I used to have is that the first person I would see there as well was the cleaner.
Yes. Yeah.
And he would have, like he was the first one that had seen the animals in the morning, and he's like,
Yes.
oh, I really think you might need to go and see this one. Like he had really not a huge
Yes.
idea around medicine, but
Yep.
because I valued his opinion, he was all another set of eyes for me.
Yeah.
And it's just appreciating what everyone can bring to the table.
I love that. I once heard a story about a business that was going belly up and they needed to save some serious dollars. And the best idea came from the cleaner who said, at night, it's just me and the machines. You don't need the lights on if I'm not on the factory floor. So he turned them off and they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that saved the company. So I love that about talking to everyone, particularly those at the coalface. It's beautiful and so true. So, next question is based on your experience, what tips do you have for others? And Jez added this, including young people who potentially are starting out or people who've been in the business for a while, particularly around developing their problem solving collaboration skills.
I think I've heard you say this quite a few times, but it's being curious. It's asking really good questions.
Yep.
And that's what I think when you collaborate, you've got to ask some good questions.
Yep.
One of the focus groups I ran for the research I was doing, and it was a post event, so it was quite a big fire that occurred in New Zealand, and we were concerned that people would have been fatigued with the debriefing process. So I tried to call it something else. But one of the firefighters that we had there came up to, because they're all a bit cautious and dubious about coming and being asked to do the animal bit.
Yes.
And at the end of it, he said, this debrief is the one I've learned the most from.
Wow.
And I really think it's asking good questions. It's bringing a lot of people in that you wouldn't necessarily tap on the shoulder. And from an educator's point of view, it's about being in that stretch zone. So being in a zone that you're not used to, and that's where you learn the most. And I like to see that these debriefs and focus groups and whatever you have, there's always something to take away and learn from it.
Yeah.
So I always go in that I'm going to learn something today. And I always definitely go in with that mindset. And you bring people in that you know it's going to stretch them.
Yes.
So you get some really good intel and information and problem solving happening.
Nice. And I love that intent that you set before you go in. So you're very clear about that, because I know some people, because it's a busy time, perhaps it's very frantic, that they're just going from one thing to the next and it's sort of a tick the box, but your intention is very grounded, very centered to be able to get that insights and stuff. So I really love that. I'm going to do a celebration of that.
I actually had one, so I run university courses and I love doing week intensives.
Yes.
Because I like to stretch people and I really do put them under the pump, because you can really work out who does well in a stressed environment, and it's usually not the ones that people think are going to perform well. But I had a firefighter. I was at a university that fortunately had a fire station on campus.
Yes.
And I'm like, I got excited because you don't normally have that resource there.
Yes.
And I was doing emergency management work. So I always invite the firefighter, invite them, they're always curious.
Yep.
And I had a firefighter for a week and he spent every day, and I utilised him.
Nice.
He said he learned so much. But right at the end of the week, he was reflecting, and I really love the fact that in emergency management we do debriefing. So it does make you do some reflection. I think reflection is so important.
Yes.
But he said, this has been life-changing for me. And I was like, oh, I didn't think my course was that good. But he's like, you know what? I never finished school. And I never thought I was smart enough or had enough to be able to have enough to contribute to a university.
Yes.
And I'm like, but you're the expert, and you don't have to have a university degree to be an expert in your area. And I was just like, how amazing is that? And it was, it is intentional for me to expose people to different things, but I never thought it would be that impactful. So I love that happened, and it just makes me want to do more of it.
Yeah, what a beautiful story, and what a gift to him from his story of, he didn't belong in the room, to what you showed that he actually did. And he didn't need a uni degree. I love that. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So then I wonder if that'll top the next question, which is, what's your favorite example of problem solving and or collaboration, and why?
For me, for the work that I do, I've shifted from, and that's, I guess it's shifting from the veterinary field to emergency management. And what the research that I did was, how can we enhance collaboration? And from an emergency management perspective, we have emergency management is very reductionist, and I'm sure that this is what happens in a lot of business as well. We live in a complex world, but we try to simplify it, and we just miss the point when we simplify and we put things in silos. And our problem solving is not very innovative. So shifting from this siloed single discipline to a transdisciplinary approach. So everyone coming together with different minds, but wanting to come collectively to unpack the problem for a solution that's going to help everyone, rather than going in there going, what can I get from this? And from an emergency management perspective, I call it an integrated approach, which is actually an Indigenous worldview on how we need to acknowledge the interdependencies of people, animals, and the environment. And that can be reflected in a lot of the work that we do. And it's having this consequence mindset. So if we make this decision here, what is the consequences of those decisions to a whole system? Because we can become very insular, because we can think that it's going to be difficult.
Yes.
So having this big picture view can take long. It can seem like it takes longer, but it actually, in fact, in the end, it's doesn't take as long because
Yes.
we're actually coming up with some fantastic solutions to a really big problem.
Love that. Excellent. Oh, what a great answer. Right, we're just nearly at the end. I can't believe this has been such a good conversation. So my next question is there anything else you'd like to share, including any helpful resources?
There's so many resources out there. Look, I'm proud of the work that I've done from my PhD, and there is one of the chapters which is a paper that I've written, and it's looking at, we're calling it how you strategies for implementing a one welfare framework in emergency management. But I've moved from the word one welfare because it's the westernized term for something that's an Indigenous approach.
Yep.
And it's looked, those 5 strategies, although it works in emergency management, I think they can work across the board.
Yep.
And the 5 strategies is looking at identifying champions, horizontal and vertical within so horizontal across different organizations, but within your own organizations. And I was employed to implement a national framework, and the national framework was the animal emergency management. So we were the new kids on the block, and I think it's a really good example of coming into something where you've got to prove yourself.
Yes.
And you can't just go in there yelling and screaming. You've got to make those networks and relationships to build trust. And we found that was the key to be able to do what we needed to do. And that's where identifying the champions within those organizations really helped.
Yes.
Because language is so important. And if I don't speak your language, I need to find someone else that speaks your language and can take that, what we're trying to achieve, to those people and champion
Yes.
it for you. So having champions is so important. And we tested this actually again post Cyclone Gabrielle. I was fortunate to have a big project looking at how we can utilize community champions. We have lifestylers, so I know you're on a rather large property.
Yes.
And I'm also on what we call lifestyle properties in New Zealand. So they're known as hobby farms.
Yes.
So in the emergency management space, and I'm sure in many spaces, they're set in this grey area because there is no one organisation that represents them. They're an eclectic group of people.
Yes.
And so they're just disproportionately impacted. So we're looking at ways that we could support them through the recovery of Cyclone Gabrielle. And I was fortunate to be able to develop a community champion program for them. And it just works. It's giving people a role to play, but giving them some skills and knowledge behind them so they're not having to find their way through something that's quite complex. But that works, and I think that works really well across any organisation. We looked at how we identify the networks and relationships like during peacetime and how you can utilise those, because a lot of the times, particularly from the animal perspective, they're not networks that we would normally use. And so you're trying to connect with someone in a crisis
Yes.
when it's not the best time to be doing that.
Yes.
And so, it's looking at how can we make those connections beforehand. And certainly working with the veterinary profession, we did a review, and the veterinary profession identified that they're quite competitive against each other, the businesses are. And so it's like competition doesn't work in a disaster.
Yep.
So we need to learn to collaborate. So we need to shift from competition to collaboration. And quite honestly, I think that's probably one of the keys to some of their solutions. And during, business as usual, not trying to be so competitive.
Yes.
I talked about having conduits to your community. So looking at what they are, for me, it's animals. So I'll stay with that. It means I get to take my dog to the keynote speaking.
How awesome.
I know. And I get asked, can you please make sure you bring Matilda with you?
I love it.
Yes, I know who the favourite is. I'm just her driver.
I love it.
But one of the other ones is we need to have interprofessional education. Again, our education is so siloed, and we need to be able to look at problems and come up with solutions together and stop really siloing our education. Yeah, so there are lots of different strategies we can use, but I think some of those, although we're talking about it being in emergency management, they're relevant, so relevant across many different fields.
Oh, love that. So, Hayley, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers?
I just think collaboration is so important, and
Yeah.
I know that people have very different understandings of collaboration. They may or may not have experienced it, but
Yes.
when you've got, they used to call them wicked problems, but I don't like calling them wicked problems. But we've got some gnarly problems out there, particularly with climate change,
Yes.
and all of us are going to be impacted. So we really need to have this different mindset and a bigger picture view, create and allowing different perspectives to come in and help with those solutions.
Love that. So I'm pretty sure there'll be some listeners and viewers that would love to reach out and contact you. So where would be the easiest places for them to find you?
Oh, I hide.
Next to Matilda, that's where it is, isn't
That's
it?
right. Yeah, should be patting her now, shouldn't I? LinkedIn is probably the best way at the moment. Websites is not something I've got. It will be in the future. So yeah, you definitely can get me through LinkedIn, or I've got an email address that people can contact me. And love to talk everything collaboration, or working in a crisis. So we could talk about this for hours, couldn't we, Danette?
We could, totally. And I'm going to say Dr. Hayley now, because you've got your PhD. So Dr. Hayley, we're going to get you back on the Magical Learning podcast as well, so you can do lots of, because I reckon a team conversation would be awesome as well. So Dr. Hayley Squance, can I say thank you so much for joining us today, and I can't wait for our next chat. Big hugs.
Huge hugs to you, Danette.
And to our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining in today.
Okay, what a great conversation. And welcome back, listeners. We're back in the recording studio. Danette, what a great conversation with Dr. Hayley. I feel like I took so many notes. But did you have anything that you wanted to share with listeners that you took down that you thought was really important?
I loved the conversation about how we like to sort of go into very linear thinking and siloing and stuff like that versus, things like crisis are ultimately super complex. So we need to be able to stay open to, rather than trying to go, here's a solution, it's like, okay, let's explore this and get more of those stakeholders' inputs to be able to do this well. And I really liked, Hayley talked about, and I'm just looking down so I get the terminology correct, that after situations, doing debriefs and focus groups so that, again, you are learning as you go, and rather than reinventing the wheel or learning the same lesson time and again, you're taking that time at the end to get smarter as a group. I really like this because I see it happen time and again. So we need to make connections beforehand. We don't want to be making connections in the middle of an emergency. You want to have built those beforehand. And Hayley made a point right towards the end about what you'll often see when people come under pressure is they'll go to competition. But actually, that's the worst thing we can do in a crisis. We need to collaborate with one another. And so even understanding yourself and what's the normal approach and recognising that approach, competition in something like disaster management, is not going to be helpful in terms of getting the best solutions for the people that are impacted and their communities. So fabulous conversation. Jez, what did you take away?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think this was a really big insight, which was that, and I think it was kind of a bit of a metaphor for the whole thing, which was that one of the big problems in natural emergencies is animals. And most of us would never think about that.
Yes.
So if you don't think about that, then you may have a big blind spot in some areas, because I never thought about it till she mentioned it, but it is obviously so true. And obviously animals will be in a really state of panic, which makes things a lot harder.
Yes.
So that was a good one. I liked the idea that good solutions come from all levels. I think we've all worked at businesses where something's extremely inefficient, but the boss doesn't seem to think it's a problem. I had at a cafe job once, they changed the coffee ordering system, and it basically meant that with every ticket, instead of writing in the computer what you wanted to do, you had to print it out, then write stuff on it, which made the system twice as slow,
Ouch.
and in coffee production, not what you want.
Oh.
Every time is of the essence. So that was something that couldn't really be communicated upwards because the boss was so happy they just installed a new system. So so that's what that can look like. Next thing is the sort of ideas around transdisciplinary approaches and interprofessional education. And I think this comes to a broader concept of what this podcast does, which is interacts us with people from different professions, and we get to see how they adapt.
Yes.
And to me, that's what this podcast is about, and it's what she's highlighting here. And then finally, I loved this idea. Identify champions at all levels.
Yes.
Make every part of your business have something that you can be successful at and rewarded for. I thought that was really good. So Dr. Hayley took a lot of notes there, and I had a great time listening to that conversation. Well, Danette, do you think it's time for our mailbag segment?
Absolutely. Here we go.
All right. It's time for Ask and Adapt. Alrighty, Danette, this is Ask and Adapt, where people can ask you an adaptable question. This can be about life, business, anything they want to ask, and you answer it using your adaptability expertise and lens. Now, you can do that on our YouTube channel, on any of the comments. Feel free to leave them there. If you want to be more private, feel free to send it to adaptwithdanette@gmail.com. But you can also comment on Spotify. There's a little comment feature there, so feel free to do it there. We'll look at all of those, and we'll hopefully answer that in a future episode. This week, Danette, someone has written in, and that person is Philip. Philip has written quite a short email actually here. So, what are some strategies for navigating changing expectations across a workforce that now spans 4 generations? Regards, Philip. So I think Philip's is about sort of an intergenerational family business. So, Danette, I know you've had experience with family businesses. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So when we're open, what we see is that each generation is going to bring different perspectives. And again, on the theme of collaboration and problem solving, being able to hear those different perspectives opens up our viewpoint. So the first thing I'd say, Philip, is understand yourself and what are your strengths. So what do you and your generation bring to the conversation? And then one of the things our brain tends to do when we don't look for commonalities or similarities, we tend to see others as foes. So I like to flip that and look for commonalities with those different generations. And it could be around why you come to work every day. It could be that you like to eat food together. Like it doesn't have to be big things, but what you want to do is get your brain to see them as a friend, not a foe. And I would be asking them about what are their strengths? What do they see? So again, we get stronger, because I love Matt Church has this phrase, which is make strong, not wrong. And I really love the ability to bring multiple perspectives and boost everyone's strength rather than I'm right, let's pull everyone else down, which is the wrong side of things. I really love the phrase yes and. So when we're in that fear base, we tend to go no but, because our brain doesn't want to open to new possibilities. But yes and adds to the conversation so we can bring in those different perspectives. And I really love the idea of saying, rather than fixing my mind on this is today and this is who I'm going to be forever, it's asking your brain, what am I going to learn today? So from those different generations, what's something that's going to grow my brain and my perspective today? So I really love, they're just some simple things you can do to bring the strong side rather than the wrong side.
Now, Danette, we should also mention you are currently writing a book that's about family businesses.
I sure am, around communicating.
Do you want to just give us a little blurb about that quickly?
Yes.
Because I feel like that's very relevant here.
Yep. So one of the things I definitely see in my executive coaching is where people don't communicate well. And obviously the more stressed we are, the less well we communicate. So I'm currently writing a book around that. And then I'm going to write one on building stronger family relationships and stronger family businesses. And then one on navigating through change, which will be fun as well. So 3, this will be a trilogy, Jez.
Very exciting. And people will be able to pick that up on your website when that's out. Yes. I just wanted to say, obviously Magical Learning is now an intergenerational business. Yes. I am your son.
Yes.
This is
2 Jets.
Exactly. And I think that what's exciting about Magical Learning is, at least from my perspective, the thing that we were able to do to even make this podcast, even though this is not through Magical Learning, but we do have a Magical Learning podcast as well, is the reason that that's possible and coming from a training and facilitation company is because the why of the company gives us the flexibility to try new things, you know? So if we look at what magical learning is about, it's about making engaging learning. It's also about trying to provide education to people. It's about giving high quality education and lots of interesting training that people can actually relate to. So a podcast fits within that. It's a new technology, but it still embodies everything that magical learning is trying to do. And in the same way, the Adapt with Danette FM podcast also embodies helping people adapt, which is what the function of the book is as well. And I just want to highlight, you know, we've got a lot of businesses that have been going for a long time. These aren't necessarily family businesses, but talking about things, we've talked about this on a Magical Learning podcast, but businesses like Nintendo and Yamaha, the way that they keep coming up with what appears to be strange new products, it comes from their why, and it's what's kept them going. You know, Yamaha, they're making motorbikes and they're making a keyboard, but, you know, they do both of them with the same intention, and so it makes sense for the brand. Nintendo, they started as a card making factory and then now have essentially seen their why and gone, you know what, let's just try and make people have as much fun as possible. So so everything makes sense in that context. So I think with that sort of 4 generations, what's that why? And then exactly what you're saying, Danette, how can we use what other generations have utilized and understood to benefit what's happening now?
I was going to say, I even reflect from when we started Magical Learning a very long time ago, that things like podcasts didn't exist. I think YouTube probably existed back then, but definitely not doing podcasts like we're doing today. And what I love is we get to learn every week by doing podcasts, and then we get to share that with so many more people because of the ability to share stuff online. So I love how that whole sphere is changing and our purpose keeps delivering in different ways.
I think I'm pretty much done. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to leave people with, or any final things you wanted to say?
Well, I think let's lead with the news story today, that it is important for us to get out, move around, observe new things and open your mind to being curious so that you can continue to adapt. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to all our listeners and our viewers, and to you, Jez, for being our producer. And as always, stay adaptable.